Thundercats. The Thunder Cutter. Deep inside the pyramid of Mumra, the mutants Slithe and Monkeyan cowered before the sinister hooded figure of Mumra himself. Once again they had failed their evil master in an unsuccessful attempt to destroy the Thundercats. The mutants blamed Lion-O's Sword of Omens and its Eye of Thundera for their latest defeat. Monkeyan cringed and continued with his excuses.
Every day the sword seems to take on more power. Everyone fears it.
Mumra snapped back at him with impatient anger.
A sword? A sword? I'll show you a sword!
Lightning crackled from his fingertips as the Master of Evil conjured up the figure of a samurai warrior, wielding a long, curved blade which hissed through the air with a horrifying sound. The terrified mutants backed away. Mumra proudly introduced his somewhat bewildered guest.
This is Hachiman, ultimate warrior, bound to a Bushido code of honor. I, Mumra, ever-living shogun of Third Earth, brought you here, Hachiman, from your planet of the Red Sun, to serve me. Your reward will be an empire of your own.
Hachiman made a rapid pass with his sword.
My sword and my skills cannot be bought, Mumra-san. I fight only for honor, against evil.
And that is exactly why you are here.
With a leering smile, Mumra turned to his bubbling cauldron, and in the steam that rose from it, he showed the samurai images of the Thundercats in fighting array.
My empire is threatened by evil invaders, as you see. They are led by a warrior whose skill with a sword is unbeatable.
With a great roar, Hachiman sliced the cauldron in two with a single swing of his sword before there was time for the image of Lion-O to be projected. Green liquid flooded over the floor, and the room was filled with great billows of steam. Hachiman sheathed his sword with a flourish and stood in a heroic pose with his muscular arms folded across his chest.
There is only one whose skill with a sword is unbeatable. He stands before you.
Mumra smiled, for his plan was working.
This other warrior is called Lion-O, Lord of the Thundercats.
Hachiman whipped his sword from its scabbard.
So, then it is truly fate that has summoned me. They call this great sword of mine Kyan Kiri, the Thunder Cutter. Where do I find this lion swordsman?
The mutants offered to take him in their sky cutter, but he refused.
No, a samurai lives a simple, basic life. I have no use for machines. I will find him alone.
He balanced his sword halfway along the blade on the tip of his index finger and addressed it in a reverent voice.
Show me which way to go, Thunder Cutter!
Very slowly, like a compass needle, the sword swung around and stopped. Hachiman sheathed it and set off in the direction that it had indicated. At the cat's lair, Lion-O and Panthro had just completed the demonstration of a warning system they had constructed for the warrior women. Their queen had requested it to help protect her kingdom of the treetops from the attacks of the mutants. The demonstration was a complete success, and Lion-O set out to install it, guided by Neda, one of the leaders of the fighting women. The usual journey would have taken 3 days, but Neda led the way through the deep forest by a shorter, secret route. A weird moaning sound echoed through the closely growing trees. Lion-O stopped and asked Neda what it was. She answered him without a pause. The sound of the 4-day drop. Suddenly, the sound increased in volume, and they came upon a circular clearing in the forest. The noise was made by the wind blowing over the top of a deep pit, which barred their way. A long, rotting tree trunk stretched across it, the only way forward. Neda turned to Lion-O. If we don't cross here, we'll have to backtrack a full day. Lion-O peered down into the pit.
That hole looks deep.
It is. That's why we call it the 4-day drop, because if you fall in... Lion-O finished the sentence for her.
It takes 4 days to hit the bottom.
He handed Neda the warning system which he had been carrying in a pack on his back.
If I don't make it, you can backtrack and still deliver this.
Then, very carefully, with his arms spread wide to hold his balance, he began to walk along the swaying log. As he did so, Hachiman burst out from the forest on the other side of the pit and began to walk across the log towards him. They met in the middle and both stopped. Lion-O was most polite.
Pardon me, sir, but as I started across first, I ask you, please, to back off.
Hachiman expanded his chest.
A samurai never backs off!
He swung his sword, and Lion-O reached for his, but instead of striking a blow, Hachiman chopped out a piece of the log. Lion-O stepped back a pace in amazement. Hachiman glared at him.
I will continue to cut this log until you back off. What do you think of that?
Slowly, Lion-O swung his sword and also chopped out a piece of the log.
That's what I think of that, samurai.
Neda could not believe her eyes. She shouted at the opposing swordsman. You fools! If one of you doesn't give way, you'll both end up in the pit. Ignoring her warning, Hachiman cut a deeper notch in the log.
Retreat, boy! Take your little sister's advice!
Lion-O also cut deeper into the log as he yelled back at Hachiman.
I am not a boy, and that is not my little sister.
The log lurched dangerously with an ominous cracking sound. Neda took off her knapsack and pulled out a length of twine attached to a stout rope. She tied the end of the rope to a tree and the twine to an arrow, which she notched in her bow and shot across the gaping pit, just as the two adversaries took another swing at the precarious log. It gave way, and they fell with their swords still in their hands. Neda's arrow drew the rope swiftly across the pit below them. They grabbed it, and their plunge was halted, as the rope jerked tight against the anchoring tree. Thankfully, both climbed up to the safety of firm ground. Neda stood with hands on hips and scolded them soundly.
What a perfect example of mindless combat!
Hachiman turned to Lion-O.
You stood up to me, young friend, and we both kept our honor. Now I must go, for I seek the Lord Lion-O. My master, the Shogun Mamra, has commanded me to destroy him and his sword.
Lion-O stepped back, his hand on the hilt of his sword.
Then go no further. I am Lion-O.
Hachiman was alarmed and saddened.
What? How can I fight a man I respect, whose little sister has just saved my life? But honor demands that I obey my Lord Mamra.
He took up a fighting pose, and Lion-O faced him. The mutant sky-cutter skimmed over the treetops, and Monkeyan pointed at the swordsman down below. Slithe chuckled mirthlessly.
We're just in time for the fight.
Lion-O and Hachiman circled warily, their eyes never wandering as they stared intensely at each other. Above them, Monkeyan and Slithe circled in their sky-cutter, eagerly waiting for the fall of their arch-enemy. Lion-O went to draw the Sword of Omens. It wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he pulled, the sword remained firmly in its scabbard. At last he gave up, took his hand from the sword, and addressed the samurai.
My sword refuses to fight you. It cannot be used for an evil cause, and this duel is evil.
Hachiman's hand went to his Thundercutter.
My honor demands that we fight to the finish.
But try as he would, his sword would not move from its sheath either.
The Thundercutter will not draw. Then you are right, young lord. This duel is wrong. Mamra lied. His cause is evil. We are friends. Our swords are one. I will go with you to fight this evil Mamra.
Neda had watched all this with growing annoyance.
Fine, but how do we get across the pit?
Hachiman strode over to a tall tree and chopped through the base of its trunk with a single blow. The tree fell directly over the pit, and the three began to cross with Hachiman in the lead, cutting off the tree branches as he went. The mutants watched, disappointed from their sky-cutter. But Slithe attempted to make things go their way. He set the sky-cutter zooming low along the tree trunk, intending to knock his enemies into the void beneath. Neda saw the craft coming just in time and shouted a warning as she threw herself flat along the tree trunk. Lion-O lost his balance and fell, but managed to grab the tree with the claw as he went over. Hachiman drove his sword into the trunk and hung on. While the mutants set their sky-cutter climbing to gain height for another try, Lion-O devised a scheme to outwit them. There was one upright branch left on the tree, and they used Neda's rope to bend it back like a spring. When the mutants returned to the attack, Hachiman cut the rope, and the branch sprang up with tremendous force and sent the sky-cutter crashing into the trees. Monkey-in struggled out and escaped into the forest. Slythe, however, was trapped, and Hatchiman confronted him, brandishing his sword.
Let me finish this worthless snake!
Lion-O restrained him.
No, he may be more useful as a prisoner. We'll take him with us to Queen Willa in the Kingdom of the Treetops.
The fearful Monkey-in reported back to Mum-Ra.
How are we going to rescue Slythe?
Mum-Ra was thoughtful.
The samurai would not fight for us because of his code of honor. We need someone without honor.
He approached the hissing cauldron and, spreading his arms through the rising vapors, called upon the ancient spirits of war. There was a brilliant flash of lightning and a thunderclap which shook the pyramid. A turbaned figure dressed all in black appeared, his face covered with a scarf so that only his eyes were visible. Monkey-in shrunk back from the evil forces that seemed to ooze from the frightful creature. Proudly, Mum-Ra identified him.
This is the ninja! If the samurai is all honor, the ninja has none. He does the evil others will not attempt. Take these crystals that bring instant sleep, O ninja, and this device that will cut through the samurai's armor. And when that armor is pierced...
Mum-Ra broke off into shrieks of wild laughter, and the ninja left to do his bidding. Aloft, in the treetop kingdom of Queen Willa of the warrior women, the warning system sounded the alert. The sentry women stood down when it was discovered that the intruder was a harmless tabbat. The fat, inoffensive creature was hauled up to the queen's chamber, where he announced that he was called Gumla, and he had come on behalf of the mutants to negotiate for the release of Slythe. The queen ordered him to be looked after and guarded for his own safety. When he had gone, she asked Lion-O what he made of the situation. The Lord of the Thundercats looked thoughtful and slowly shook his head.
Something's wrong.
Gumla sat quite still on the wooden, woven floor of the room assigned to him. He remained motionless long into the night, when everyone was sleeping and even the guard rested, leaning on her bow. Out of the silence there came a low zipping sound, and the ninja squeezed himself out of the false skin that had disguised him as Gumla, the tabbat. Using the crystals Mum-Ra had given him, the ninja put all the guards into a deep sleep and released Slythe. Then he turned his attention to Hatchiman. But as he used the device to open the samurai's armor, the swordsman grabbed him hard.
You snake's belly! You sniff of wicked wind! Do you really think you could trick a samurai? You are finished, ninja!
His voice rose to a shout which wakened Neda. His eyes wandered towards her for a moment, which gave his captive a chance to escape. The ninja darted clear, grabbed Neda, and held her above his head, balanced on the edge of the balcony hundreds of feet above the forest floor.
Take a step, samurai, and I dive with her into the ground!
Hatchiman stopped in his tracks. The little sister had saved his life. The ninja continued in a whisper.
Now, samurai, release the ladders to the ground so that my friends, the mutants, may climb up.
Hatchiman swung his sword and cut the mechanism that held up the ladders to the treetop kingdom, and Monkey-in and Jackalman charged up the hill towards them. But the worried Lion-O had used the Eye of Thundera to show him what was happening, and he shouted out his battle cry.
Thunder! 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 Thundercats! Ho!
The laser beam projected the signal on the clouds above the cat's lair, and soon the Thundercats had manned the thunder tank and were on their way. High in the treetops, Neda twisted violently in the grasp of the evil ninja.
Never mind me, Hatchiman! Destroy him before it is too late!
The samurai did not move.
No, you saved my life. It would be against my code.
Neda deliberately kicked the ninja in the head, which made him drop her. As she fell towards the ground and certain death far below, she called out to Hatchiman,
Now you needn't worry!
In a split second, the samurai threw his sword. It thudded into a tree just below Neda as she fell. She grabbed the handle and swung herself into the tree and safety. Quickly recovering his weapon, Hatchiman returned to slash at the ninja, but the blade struck into empty cloth. The ninja knew that he had met his match and vanished back to whence he came. At the top of the ladder, Slythe called to the other mutants to hurry up and join him. Excitedly they rushed on until they saw the thunder tank approaching. The fearsome sight made them turn tail and disappear into the forest. In panic, Slythe slid down the ladder. He landed in a heap on the ground and limped off after them. Another mutant attack had failed. When all was calm and settled again, Hachiman said farewell and walked off into the forest. Nada watched him go as she questioned Lion-O.
If it had come to it, who do you think would have won that sword duel?
As the samurai turned and waved, Lion-O gave her a simple answer.
In a duel, nobody wins.
Thundercats! The Terror of Hammerhand! From his vantage point on a hill overlooking the forest-lined shore, Snarf, the awkward but lovable member of the Thundercat clan, saw a strange vessel run up onto the beach. Its prow was shaped like a skull, and streaks of crimson fire roared from the eye sockets, aimed at a group of baby unicorns playing by the water. The unicorns scattered in fear and ran into the forest. All escaped, but one which was caught in the tangle of roots. Two unpleasant, bearded characters left the ship and headed towards the trapped unicorn, carrying a net. One, the leader, was known as Hammerhand, for one of his hands was shaped like a hammer and possessed enormous strength. They were berserkers, a wild and cutthroat band who lived by raiding and robbing more peaceable creatures. The baby unicorn was to be their supper, but not if Snarf could help it. He ran down the hill and freed the small creature just in time. As it escaped into the forest, Snarf ran the other way to distract the berserkers and was caught in their net. Hammerhand looked at him with a scowl.
He looks a bit tough, but he'll do for a snack.
Snarf was disgusted.
Snack? I'm too tough and stringy for a snack.
The berserkers took their prize back to the ship. Hammerhand poked him in the chest.
This creature'll make a good beast of burden. Looks too unnatural to eat.
Their opinion of him made Snarf very indignant.
I'll have you know I'm Snarf, valiant squire to Lion-O, lord of the Thundercats, and I am neither a pack animal nor a natural. Snarf.
He saw a large spiked weapon close by and reached out for it, but Hammerhand was too quick for him. He brought down his terrible hand and with one mighty blow ground the weapon into powder. Snarf pulled his hand away. Hammerhand sneered and turned to his henchman.
Load him up with our supplies. Let's go find those tasty unicorns. I'm hungry.
Lion-O was exploring an unknown part of the forest when he heard branches crackling and frightened neighing coming from somewhere ahead. He ran towards the sound and found a unicorn trapped and struggling with a large carnivorous tree. The tree's snaky green branches moved like arms and dragged the frightened animal towards its hideous mouth. Drawing his sword, Lion-O rushed to the rescue. He hacked at the grasping branches of the tree, severing one and then another, but as fast as he cut them off, the tree laughed and new branches grew to take their place. The tree lashed out with its new growth, trying to swat Lion-O away. He persevered, and at last managed to cut through all the branches that held the unicorn. With a whinny of gratitude, it moved out of the tree's reach. Lion-O watched it, and made the mistake of turning his back on the tree. A large, powerful branch snapped down like a whip and encircled his sword arm around the wrist. Desperately, Lion-O struggled to wield his sword, but he was unable to break the grip of the monstrous tree, which lifted him clean off the ground and pulled him towards its eager mouth. At that moment, a huge bird flew down, snatched the sword from his hand, and flew off with it. Lion-O was filled with dismay.
The Sword of Omens!
He had to get free. Using his claw shield, he rasped repeatedly at the branch that held him, and at last managed to sever it and roll clear. He stroked the unicorn and looked unhappily skyward.
Now I've got to find some way to get my sword back.
The unicorn nudged him with its horn. There was a golden ring around the base of it, which flashed and glowed. Lion-O slid the ring off the horn and put it on his finger. A flash of electric blue light filled the clearing, and Lion-O found himself astride the bird flying through the air. The Sword of Omens was still in its beak, and Lion-O took hold of it and tried to get it back. The bird did all it could to unseat him. It swooped, dived, and looped, but Lion-O held tight, his legs locked firmly around the bird's body. A rock face loomed ahead, and the bird flew straight for it. At the last moment it swung around and tried to slam Lion-O into the cliff, but still he held on tight. He smiled grimly.
Nice try, but you can't shake me.
The bird tried another tactic. It dived low and flew through the jungle, intending that the branches of the trees would catch Lion-O and whip him off its back, but the branches broke when his powerful body struck them. At last, Lion-O decided that it was time to land. He leant forward and took hold of the sword with both hands, one at each end. His claw shield protected the hand that held the blade. Now the sword was like a horse's bit in the beak of the massive bird. Lion-O pushed down with all his might and forced the bird to dive for the ground. When they were only a dozen feet or so above the forest floor, Lion-O used the sword like a bar and somersaulted over the bird's head. For a moment he dangled in front of the bird until it was able to hold his weight no longer. It opened its beak, and Lion-O landed lithely on the ground with the sword safely in his hands. As he did so, the sword began to growl, and the eye of Thundera opened wide. A Thundercat was in danger. Lion-O raised the sword.
Sword of Omens, give me sight beyond sight.
And through the eye of Thundera, he saw what had befallen Snarf.
Snarf, captured. I've got to locate that beach.
He sheathed the sword and ran off along the jungle trail. Meanwhile, Snarf had been forced into his new role of pack animal for the berserkers. Loaded down with piles of their equipment, he tottered along on all fours, led by a rope around his neck. Hammerhand's henchmen urged him roughly on.
Faster, you overgrown hairball! You're holding us up! Follow those unicorn footprints!
Snarf staggered on, the rope halter chafing his neck. Hammerhand struck out with his mighty hand, felling trees with a single blow, as he thought of the delicious meal the unicorns would provide when they caught up with them. The trail that Lion-O followed widened into a forest clearing. There he came upon an ancient man whose long white beard reached to the ground. The man was not alone. Beside him stood a woman as old as he, who raised her staff to protect the baby unicorn which cowered behind them. The old man called out to Lion-O.
Keep back!
His companion reinforced the command.
Or we shall cast a spell upon you. We are the keepers of the unicorns. This little one has just escaped from deadly danger, but there is still another lost to us.
Lion-O realized that these people would not be a threat to him once they understood his purpose.
The other unicorn is safe. I am Lion-O, Lord of the Thundercats. I mean you no harm. I came upon your unicorn in the forest and freed her from a tree monster. Behold for yourself.
He held up his sword and made the incantation.
Sword of Omens, give me sight beyond sight.
The eye of Thundera showed the venerable keepers a vision of Lion-O rescuing the unicorn. The old man nodded slowly.
He either speaks the truth, or he is a magician.
Lion-O looked earnestly at the old man.
I am no magician. I seek a nearby beach, and my companion, the Snarf.
Hearing this, the baby unicorn reared up and made tiny sounds, which the keepers appeared to understand. The old woman interpreted for Lion-O.
The little one has seen your Snarf. He came to her aid. How can we help you?
At that moment, there was a tremendous crash, and 2 great trees were felled by Hammerhand as he strode into the clearing, his henchmen pulling the unfortunate Snarf. Lion-O drew his sword and went to assist the overburdened Thundercat, but held back when he heard the berserkers threaten.
Your so-called Snarf will fall to the Hammerhand of Hammerhand if you do not lower your sword.
All eyes were on Lion-O, and Snarf seized the opportunity to wrench himself free of his captors and leap to his lord's side.
Hammer away! The Snarf is ready!
With a great cry, Lion-O stepped forward, the sword growling in his hand.
You are no match for the Sword of Omens!
Snarf was so interested in the fight that followed as Lion-O got the better of Hammerhand that he did not notice the other berserker creeping up upon him until, once again, he found himself a prisoner.
Stop, Lion-O. Let Hammerhand go unharmed, or your shaggy friend will feel my mace.
At the threat to Snarf, Lion-O lowered his sword, and the berserkers backed away into the forest, taking Snarf and the baby unicorn with them. Lion-O turned to the keepers.
I will find them and return your baby to you. I swear by the code of Thundera.
He held out his hand, and the keepers noticed the ring from the unicorn on his finger. The old woman gazed on it in awe.
No man has ever worn that ring. Go, and may it aid you on your journey, magician friend.
Lion-O arrived at the beach to see that the skull ship was already at sea. Just before it disappeared into the mist, he made out the figures of Snarf and the baby unicorn aboard it.
I'll have to catch up with them somehow.
He leapt aboard a rowing boat and set off in pursuit with powerful strokes of the oars. But the boat was old and soon began to founder. Before it finally sank, he dived overboard and began to swim after the berserker's ship. He made good progress until he was caught in the powerful currents of an underwater whirlpool. Strong as he was, he could not prevent himself from being dragged down under the surface. As he struggled against the force of the water, the magic ring on his finger began to flash. In the hold of the skull ship, Snarf was tied to a post with his hands behind him. He saw a great battle axe a short distance away. If he could get at it, he could use it to free himself. He stretched out his tail. The axe was just out of reach. But the unicorn, which was tied up close by, managed to edge it a little nearer to him with its horn. Snarf curled the tip of his tail around the axe handle, and soon he had cut their bonds. They crept stealthily out of the hold and towards the ship's rail. As they were about to jump over the side, the Hammerhand of Hammerhand came whistling through the air and struck down just beside Snarf. He jumped back into the well of the ship, part of the broken rail still in his hand. Hammerhand loomed over him menacingly. Suddenly, the rushing sound of fast water was heard, and a great wake could be seen approaching the skull ship at a tremendous rate, like a torpedo. It was Lion-O, propelled through the water by the magic properties of the unicorn ring. He leapt aboard the ship and confronted Hammerhand. With a roar, Hammerhand attacked. Time and again he brought down his giant hand, but always Lion-O was too quick for him, and all that the berserker achieved was more and more damage to his ship. Using the claw, Lion-O clawed his way to the top mast, followed more slowly by Hammerhand. At the top, Lion-O turned and looked down. There was Snarf, sitting on the rail. He looked up at his lord, and as he did so, overbalanced into the water with a cry. The baby unicorn jumped overboard to help him, and without hesitation, Lion-O dived from the top of the mast.
Hang on, Snarf! I'm coming for you!
Once he hit the water, Lion-O swam rapidly over to Snarf and took his arm, helped by the unicorn. Snarf spluttered his thanks and added,
I don't want to be a spoil sport, but look over there.
They looked and saw the skull ship coming towards them with the berserkers on deck, armed with harpoon spears and battle axes. That was more than they could handle from the water. With difficulty, Lion-O drew his sword and held it high above the waves. The eye snapped open as he chanted,
Thunder! 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 Thundercats! Ho!
A beam went shooting out from the sword and projected the signal against the sky high above them. It was up to the rest of the Thundercats now. Would they come in time? The skull ship came ever closer until it was right upon them. Lion-O looked up and saw the two berserkers leering down at him.
It's like spearing fish in a barrel, and you're the fish.
The light sparkled on the wickedly sharp points of their harpoons as they drew back their arms and prepared to throw their deadly weapons at the helpless Thundercats. But even as they began to throw, a mighty roar of engines filled the air. The Thundercat thunder tank zoomed over the surface of the sea like a powerboat and scooped Lion-O and Snarf up in its mouth. It turned rapidly and came back for the baby unicorn. Once everyone was aboard, Panthro, who was at the controls, turned his attention to the skull ship. A sizzling beam of light from a laser gun turned the sails to dust, and the ship wobbled out of control. But Panthro was not finished yet. He set his vessel on a course that closely circled the skull ship. Round and round went the Thunder Tank, faster and faster, until a huge whirlpool formed, which sucked at the stricken skull ship and dragged it down into the depths. Lion-O watched from a window.
It worked, Panthro. They're gone. Now, first stop is the Unicorn Forest.
It did not take long to reach the forest, and Lion-O set about looking for the unicorn which had given him the ring. When he found her, he smiled and took it from his finger.
Thanks for giving me your ring. By stopping to help you, I ended up helping myself and my friend.
He held out the ring, and the unicorn lowered its head. Lion-O slipped the ring onto the horn. The unicorn nuzzled him gently, then turned and trotted off. Snarf licked his lips.
Can we go home to lunch now, Lion-O? All that heavy work gave me an appetite.
Lion-O smiled and gave a shake of his head.
Taking a nap gives you an appetite. Come on, then. Let's get back to the Thunder Tank. I expect we'll find there's something left to eat.
The two Thundercats walked away. The unicorn stood watching them, and the magic ring on its horn glowed and sparkled for an instant, until the graceful animal turned and disappeared amongst the trees.
Thundercats. Return of the Driller. The peace of the enchanted forest of the unicorns was pleasantly disturbed by the happy laughter of Wily Cat and Wily Kit, the youngest of the Thundercats. Helped by the unicorns, they were gathering apples for Snarf, who was preparing a special meal back in the cat's lair. Each of the young Thundercats was mounted on a white unicorn, and Wily Cat tried, unsuccessfully, to juggle with some apples. He overbalanced and fell to the ground.
You made me do that, Wily Kit.
She answered him with a laugh.
No, you fell because you broke the law.
What law?
The law of gravity.
She laughed again, and Wily Cat joined in. They would not have been so happy, however, had they realized that they were being observed by the evil Mumra. The hideous creature watched them, projected in the steam of his bubbling cauldron. His red eyes glinted.
What a tranquil scene! The Thundercats romp and play unmolested on my planet. I shall soon put an end to this frivolity.
With a wave of his arms, Mumra cleared the steam screen and conjured up one of his evil assistants.
Driller! Sand devil of the deep earth! Mumra summons you once more!
Out in the desert, lightning played around the points of Mumra's pyramid and obelisks. A dust spiral swirled violently, and the Driller emerged, spinning to the surface. The voice of Mumra echoed through his brain.
To the pyramid! I await you!
The Driller answered the command, and his screw-threaded body propelled him over the desert sand to join his master in the treasure house of the pyramid. There, Mumra showed him heaps of diamonds.
Without diamonds, a driller's drill point becomes dull, does it not? And when your point dulls, you are useless, unable to move, and buried under the earth for eternity. Now, unless you do as I say, I shall stop giving you diamonds. You understand?
The Driller understood, and followed Mumra to his so-called throne room, where the cauldron bubbled and displayed an image of a smoking lake with trees around it. As they watched, a tree fell and was instantly dissolved in the seething liquid. The mummified master of evil pointed to the scene.
This, Driller, is Acid Lake. It contains ultrasolvin, the most powerful acid known. Your mission is to drill an underground channel from Acid Lake to the Thundercats' lair tonight and dissolve it into soup. And the Thundercats with it!
The eyes of Mumra glowed with wicked pleasure as he enjoyed the thought of the fate he had prepared for his hated foes. He dismissed the driller, who set his body spinning and speedily burrowed his way through the sand to begin his devilish task. At the cat's lair, the Thundercats were unaware of the great danger that threatened them. Snarf was in the kitchen, preparing a special applesauce to celebrate the latest invention of Panthro and Tigra, a new super fuel for the Thunder Tank. He tasted his sauce delicately and turned to the watching Wily Cat and Wily Kit.
Yes, Snarf. It's going to be very good. Just a little more cinnamon, I think. Pass me that jar, will you?
Beneath the ground, the driller had almost finished the tunnel from the cat's lair. He burrowed up from below until there was just a thin layer of earth between the tunnel and the corrosive contents of the acid lake. Then he drilled small holes around that layer to weaken it and made his escape, boring his way rapidly through the earth up into the daylight above. He was gone none too soon, for one by one the small holes began to smoke, and thin streams of acid began to appear, leaking into the tunnel below. The action of the acid caused the holes to widen. More acid poured through, widening the holes still further until they joined. The plug of earth that held back the viscous liquid gave way completely, and the acid gushed through like a dam burst. It roared and steamed along the tunnel, rushing in a torrent towards the cat's lair. Above, while Snarf continued to perfect his applesauce before an appreciative audience of Wily Cat and Wily Kit, Panthro and Tigra were in the laboratory, giving a demonstration of their new superfuel to Lion-O. It was a great success, even more powerful than they had expected. The rocket motor had been fixed to the table to keep it steady, but the fuel was so strong that the rocket motor was sent right through the opposite wall, still attached to the table. Lion-O was impressed.
A few drops of that stuff can run our thunder tank for weeks. But can't you come up with something that doesn't smell so foul?
He sniffed the air and screwed up his face in disgust. Tigra put a little of the fuel close to Lion-O's nose. "This stuff is quite odorless. Here, take a whiff." Lion-O did so and agreed.
You're right. Maybe it's something Snarf is cooking.
But when he went to the kitchen and accused Snarf of being responsible for the dreadful smell that by now had spread through the cat's lair, Snarf was rather upset. He had no time to reply, however, before Tigra rushed in, sounding the alarm. "Red alert! Get ready for the possible evacuation of the lair! I put that foul odor through the analyzer. It's ultrasolvic acid, the stuff that's in Acid Lake." Lion-O was on his feet immediately, leading the way to the control room. If Acid Lake was flooding, they had to find out how and why. Monitor screens displayed pictures of the lake from every angle, while the Thundercats busily operated the switches and computed the results. When the survey was completed, Panthro studied it carefully. "The lake's not flooding, so where is the acid coming from?" The dreadful smell of the acid continued to grow stronger. They had to find out the cause, and quickly. Lion-O went to the Sword of Omens and drew it from its scabbard.
Sword of Omens, give me sight beyond sight!
He peered into the vision holes and saw the tunnel that had been drilled beneath the cat's lair, connecting it with the acid lake. He lowered the sword and turned to the others.
The acid's right under this building. It's eating away at the earth below.
Tigra thought quickly. "We've got just one chance to save the lair. There's only one thing that will stop that acid: sponge fog. We have to cut a big section of it, tow it back, and get it under the building. Once it's there, it will neutralize the acid instantly." Lion-O was already on his way.
Well, what are we waiting for?
The Thundercats manned the Thunder Tank and sped off through the Unicorn Forest and over the Bridge of Light into the mountainous country beyond, where they would find the desperately needed sponge fog. Mumra watched their progress in the steam of his cauldron. He was furious that the Thundercats had discovered what was happening and that they had escaped the effects of the acid, but he was sure they would not be able to save their lair. His eyes flamed as he leered at the image of the speeding Thunder Tank.
Without the protection of the cat's lair, they will be no match for Mum-Ra, and 1 hour is all it will take for that acid to turn the cat's lair into soup.
He waved his hand dismissively, and the image in the steam dissolved. Laughing wildly, he picked up an hourglass, turned it, and slammed it down on the table before him. The sand ran smoothly and evenly from the top into the bottom.
1 hour, Thundercats. That's all it will take to destroy everything you have on Third Earth. And then you will be at my mercy!
The Thunder Tank roared across country towards Rock Mountain, where the great clumps of peach-colored sponge fog were to be found. When Panthro halted the Thunder Tank close by, Lion-O lost no time giving his orders.
We must move fast. We need a block 20 by 20 by 3 feet deep.
Tigra and Chitara operated the controls, and 2 cutter arms emerged from the rear of the Thunder Tank, equipped with circular blades. The blades sliced into the sponge fog, easily cutting out a block to Lion-O's specifications. The cutters were withdrawn, and a pincer arm took their place. It grabbed the block of sponge fog and held it in tow behind the Thunder Tank. Suddenly, a group of rock men appeared on the mountain above them and began to hurl boulders down at the Thunder Tank. The whole machine shook with their impact. Panthro spoke urgently to his leader. "Rockmen, they'll wreck us for sure if we stay on this mountain road. We have to change course, Lion-O."
But that will take us straight through the forest of giant insects.
Panthro put the engines into gear. "It's our only chance." The Thunder Tank sped forward, still attacked by a hail of boulders from the rockmen. Panthro struggled to keep it on the road. "When I built this thing, I never figured on a storm of boulders, and we still have a mile to go before we can get off this course." Snarf ducked his head as a particularly large boulder dented the roof above him.
Snarf, too bad you didn't build it with a sponge cover so the rocks could bounce off.
Lion-O turned to him with a large grin on his face.
Brilliant idea, Snarf. Chitara, Tigra, elevate the sponge directly overhead.
The pincer arm raised the block of sponge fog up and over the Thunder Tank. A second arm emerged to support it forward, and the rockmen's boulders bounced harmlessly off. Dusk had fallen, as, with the sponge fog towed behind them once more, they entered the forest of giant insects. Mum-Ra studied their image in the steam of his cauldron. He smiled evilly.
So, they have evaded the Rockmen, but the Meccano sect will destroy the Thundercats forever.
He glanced at the hourglass.
And in half an hour, their home base shall be just a memory.
His wicked laughter echoed around the pyramid as he settled back to watch the Thundercats encounter with a giant mechanical insect. The Meccano sect clamped 2 great pincers around the Thunder Tank, and its great jagged steel jaws started to gnaw their way into the hull. Sparks flew as the jaws screeched and grated against the metal sides. Inside, the noise was terrible, but Panthro was not worried. He pulled a lever which sent a powerful electric current through the outside of the hull and into the limbs of the Meccano sect. Its circuits fused. It released the Thunder Tank from its grasp and flapped away, with blue smoke streaming from its joints. It started to climb, then stalled and plunged back into the forest, exploding in a sheet of flame. But they were not out of danger yet. A gigantic horned beetle lumbered towards them, its pincers like great antlers threatening to crush them. Lion-O pulled at a control lever.
We've got a surprise for you too, Mr. Beetle.
A large shovel emerged from a trap door in the nose of the Thunder Tank. It slid under the beetle and tipped it over onto its back. The Thunder Tank moved on past it as it lay with its legs kicking helplessly in the air. All seemed to be going well, until with a whining noise, the Thunder Tank came to a stop. The smile on Panthro's face disappeared. The transmission must be out. Lion-O opened the hatch and went outside to investigate. Suddenly, a huge worm appeared behind him. Its head had eyes mounted on stems, and its enormous body was glowing red. Below its eyes was a beak, which opened and closed like the blades of a pair of giant scissors. The sound made by the beak made Lion-O turn. He saw that the worm had wrapped its body twice around the thunder tank and had lifted it off the ground. That was why it wouldn't move. Its treads spun uselessly in the air. Lion-O went for his sword, but the worm caught him in its beak, so that his arms were pinned to his side. His cries for help were drowned by the whine of the ineffective treads. The worm released the thunder tank and dragged the kicking Lion-O off to its hole. With its treads back on the ground, the tank moved off in the opposite direction. Mum-Ra watched his screen and rubbed his hands in glee.
Worm eats cat. A fitting end for their leader. Their fates are sealed.
But Snarf was worried when Lion-O didn't come back inside. Panthro stopped the vehicle, and the Thundercats, armed with their weapons, set out to look for their leader. Meanwhile, Lion-O managed to get one arm free enough to draw the Sword of Omens. With difficulty, he held it up.
Thunder, 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 Thundercats, ho!
The laser signal zoomed into the sky and brought the searching Thundercats to his aid. At last he was released, and the worm slid feebly back into its hole. Lion-O managed to smile.
Thanks, guys. A few seconds more and I might have been living in that wormhole.
Panthro was not amused. If we don't get that sponge fog back in time to save the lair from that acid, we might all be living in a wormhole. Mum-Ra watched the rescue in dismay and smacked his fist into his hand.
Ah, escaped again. But this time I shall put out their light personally.
He stretched out his arms and made the incantation to change himself into the ever-living form with red pulsating chest and bulging muscles. As the thunder tank approached the glittering bridge of light which straddled the river of despair, Mum-Ra appeared above it, sending beams of blackness from his hand. The light beams that made up the bridge disappeared, and the thunder tank splashed into the river and drifted upside down towards the whirlpool of infinity. While the tank was upside down, the controls were useless, and it was kept upside down by the sponge fog attached to it. Lion-O managed to release the fog with his sword. The thunder tank was righted, and then came the difficult task of reclaiming the sponge fog, which had drifted off downstream. At last all seemed well again, as they resumed their journey back to the cat's lair. But Panthro cautioned them. "We haven't made it yet. If we don't get this thing back to the lair before dark, our home turns to soup." When they arrived at the lair, it was almost dark, and great clouds of green acid fumes were emerging from all around the base. Panthro extended an automatic hammer from the body of the tank. "The acid fumes are too strong. We'll have to stay in the tank." Lion-O agreed.
I'll hammer a hole through to the foundations. Then we'll swivel the thunder tank and pack in the sponge fog.
With the sponge fog in place at last, the acid was neutralized, just as the last grain of sand dropped to the bottom of Mum-Ra's hourglass. He was defeated yet again. But back in the cat's lair, Lion-O could still smell something strange. Snarf knew what it was, and he explained sadly.
Burnt applesauce. We didn't get back in time to save that.
Thundercats. Safari Joe. Panthro sat at the master control panel in the cat's lair. With Tigra and Chitara, he had monitored the landing of a strange spaceship not far away. Always quick-tempered, something was irritating him. Whoever landed that ship set up some kind of electronic blind. Our laser scopes can't see through. Chitara was already on the move. Lion-O should know about this! Out in the jungle that surrounded the cat's lair, concealed inside a great dome of electronic force, the owner of the mysterious spaceship was making his plans. He was Safari Joe, who called himself the most successful big game hunter in the galaxy. He'd come to Third Earth with his mechanical bearer, known as Mule, to add to his animal collection. He polished his multi-barreled rifle lovingly and questioned his robot companion.
Well, Mule, these big cats you found for me better be a decent challenge.
The mule corrected him.
Thundercats, sir.
Big cats, aqua cats, sky cats, I've hunted them all.
You haven't hunted Thundercats, sir. They're different.
Then get to work, you lazy mule. Set up the holojector. That'll give me the specifications of these Thundercats. A good hunter knows everything about his prey before he moves in for the kill.
Unaware of any danger, the mischievous pair of Thundercats, Wily Cat and Wily Kit, were riding their new spaceboards in great arcs and loops through the sky. The branches of a thorn bush were parted silently, and Safari Joe peered up at the carefree pair. He selected one of the barrels of his rifle and fired twice. Both the spaceboards were hit by feathered darts, which sent them out of control, and Wily Cat and Wily Kit plummeted to earth. Safari Joe caught them in silver sacks before they hit the ground. He chuckled to himself.
Safari Joe does it again!
He took the squirming sacks back to his camp, where the mule had set up a row of cages, each bearing the name of a Thundercat. He bundled Wily Cat and Wily Kit into those prepared for them. The mule congratulated him.
A successful hunt, sir.
Will these cages hold the mule?
The bars are made of thundradium, sir, a substance that somehow weakens Thundercats.
Good. Now, let's see who's next on the holojector.
The mule activated the device and gave a commentary as an image of Tigra appeared.
Thundercat prey, Tigra, the architect. Defense systems, paranormal strength, agility, an energized bolo whip, and invisibility. Weakness, Tigra cannot swim.
The image of Tigra faded and was replaced by Chitara.
Thundercat prey, Chitara, the swift one. Defense systems, super speed, paranormal senses, and a power staff. Weakness, Chitara can maintain top speed only short distances. She is vulnerable to fire, lightning, and energy bolts.
Safari Joe tilted back his hat and whistled.
These full-grown ones are dangerous. Any recommendations, mule?
Neutralize defense systems.
The hunter picked up his rifle and grinned evilly.
Pity the beasts. Pity 'em when Safari Joe goes hunting.
When Lion-O was told about the strange spaceship, he used the Sword of Omens to try to penetrate its secret, but without success.
There's some sort of electrical interference. I can see it, but not through it.
Tigra and Chitara decided that they must check out what was happening at close quarters, and immediately set off for the place where the alien craft had seemed to land. They hastened along the jungle trails, little knowing that danger lurked above them. Hidden in a tree, Safari Joe lay in wait. He fired at Chitara. A small metal clamp streaked from his rifle and clicked around her ankle like a handcuff. It bleeped, and she was hoisted into the air by one leg and held upside down 10 feet above the ground. The hunter jumped down from his hiding place and fired 3 more times, so that all 4 of Chitara's limbs were cuffed. She was held in the air by an invisible force, as if tied to a pole like a captive animal. Tigra snapped his whip and confronted their attacker.
Set her free, hunter! Who's gonna make me?
Safari Joe fired an energy beam which hit the ground just in front of the oncoming Tigra. It gouged out a gaping hole which the Thundercat was unable to avoid. He fell into it, and his opponent selected another barrel, which fired a stream of water into the pit. It was soon full, and Tigra was out of his depth. He splashed about in panic, and it was an easy task for the hunter to pull him out and add him to his collection. He held up the limp and soaking Thundercat and crowed with delight.
Safari Joe does it again. That's 4 Thundercats I've got.
Chitara and Tigra were taken back to the camp and deposited in the Thundranium cages, guarded by the mule which marched back and forth in front of them. Night fell, and still the robot sentry kept up its tireless vigil. Chitara watched it from her cage.
Oh, doesn't that thing ever rest?
Tigra answered her in a flat voice.
It wouldn't matter. This Thundranium cage has me weaker than a kitten.
With a sigh, Chitara agreed with him.
Me too. And the poor kids, they're out like lights. Somehow we've got to warn Lion-O. If only I had my staff.
She was startled by a sudden rattling on the bars of her cage.
It was Safari Joe, with her staff in his hand. He poked at her with it and laughed. "Looking for this?" She snarled and lunged at the bars. Her tormentor dodged back and laughed again. "Nice, kitty. Be nice, or I'll make your tiger friend next door into a rug."
At least tell us why you're doing this, Safari Joe.
"Why? For sport. Why else? I am a sportsman."
No, you're not. You're just a bully.
The hunter stared at Chitara, his eyes bulging with rage. He angrily shifted a barrel of his rifle into the firing position and aimed it at the helpless Thundercat.
Take that back!
Chitara stood quite still, staring back at him defiantly. Safari Joe's angry look melted into an evil smile.
Brave words, Thundercat. But let's see how brave you'll be when your friends Panthro and Lion-O are safely behind Thundranium bars.
He laughed triumphantly and called to the mule to set up the holojector again. An image of Panthro appeared, and the mule repeated the information that the machine delivered.
Thundercat prey, the deadly Panthro. Defense systems, paranormal strength, master of all fighting arts, master mechanic, able to fashion or repair almost any device. Weaknesses, Panthro fears bats.
Safari Joe stared at the image of Panthro and fingered his multi-barreled rifle.
Bats, eh? Is that all he's afraid of?
Yes, sir.
The hunter took a shell from the bandolier slung across his chest and loaded his rifle. With a wicked smile, he flicked the barrel smartly into position.
Good! I love a challenge.
In the control room at the cat's lair, Panthro and Lion-O were still trying unsuccessfully to penetrate the electronic blind with which Safari Joe had surrounded the area about his spaceship. Snarf joined them. He looked worried.
I can't find Wily Cat and Wily Kit anywhere. No.
Panthro was tired of not being able to do anything. He turned to Lion-O.
"I'll take the thunder tank and have a good look round. You keep your eyes glued to the scanners, Lion-O. I'll call you the moment I get anything."
He ran from the room. Restlessly, Lion-O got up to go too, but Snarf held him back.
You're supposed to be on duty here. We each have to take our turn guarding the lair, Lion-O.
"I know, Snarf, but I hate just sitting here and watching." He turned back to the control panel and glared impatiently at the monitor screens. Panthro already had the thunder tank in motion, heading for the jungle where the strange shield hid the unknown spacecraft from the inquisitive probing of the Thundercats. He drove the machine slowly and without lights to avoid being seen or making a noise that would warn whoever was out there that he was on his way. But the moon came up, shining so brightly that it was like day. No chance of not being seen, thought Panthro, so why bother trying not to be heard? He switched on full lighting, geared all systems to readiness, and applied maximum power. The engine roared, and the thunder tank picked up speed and raced along the jungle trail. Panthro felt better as he sensed the surge of power all about him. At least he was doing something.
"I might as well go in with teeth bared and fur flying."
The trail twisted and turned, but the thunder tank responded easily to Panthro's deft handling of the controls. Then he saw something unusual ahead. He slowed his vehicle to a standstill. A huge dome of vari-colored energy rose from the jungle floor. Panthro eyed it curiously.
"That must be the electronic blind."
He left the thunder tank and walked towards the flashing, sparkling light. He could see nothing through it. Gingerly, he touched it. There was a buzzing sound. Panthro stepped back, thinking what to do next. He could not see that on the other side of the screen, Safari Joe stood opposite him. But Safari Joe could see Panthro, and hear him, too, as he voiced aloud what he had decided to do.
"Let's see if this shield thing can hold up against the thunder tank."
As Panthro walked back to his machine, the hunter raised his rifle.
No way am I letting you have the chance to see.
Panthro gave the thunder tank full power and headed towards the electronic shield. he was met by 5 rapid shots from one of the barrels of Safari Joe's versatile rifle. Great darts embedded themselves in the metal of the thunder tank, and they exploded in clouds of many-colored gases. The powerful machine was sent somersaulting backwards to land upside down, hissing steam and smoke. Panthro crawled out from underneath it. Safari Joe walked through the shield and faced him.
Had enough, Thundercat?
Panthro growled angrily and sent a lightning bolt searing towards the hunter. He dodged it and fired an energy bolt from the hip. It formed into a fearful bat of pure energy which screeched and flung itself on Panthro, enveloping him with its wings. Terrified, he tripped and fell, his nunchuck weapons releasing sleep gas, which worked against him. The energy bat dissolved to reveal the mighty Panthro lying unmoving on the ground. Safari Joe picked him up with one hand and held him at arm's length.
Ha! Safari Joe does it again!
Back in the cat's lair, Lion-O could wait no longer. He was in the sword-keeping room, strapping on the claw shield, in spite of Snarf's appeal.
Now, Lion-O, you can't just run off into the unknown. That's what the others did, and look what happened to them.
We don't know what happened, Snarf.
Exactly what I mean. You gotta find out what you're up against.
But how? In answer to Lion-O's question, Jaga, the wisest of all Thundercats, materialized from the realm of the invisible. He told Lion-O the name of his opponent and how he had imprisoned the other Thundercats in Thundranium cages.
Beware, young lord, beware! Safari Joe knows all our weaknesses. He is a formidable opponent.
Jaga faded back into his own world. Lion-O wanted to know more, but Jaga had gone.
Well, at least we know more than we did before.
And at Safari Joe's camp, the hunter was learning more about his next prey, Lion-O. The holojector produced an image of the Lord of the Thundercats, but when it tried to reproduce the Sword of Omens, the power of the sword was too much, even in its image form, and the holojector was shattered into pieces. Safari Joe turned on the mule.
What happened?
Eye of Thundera defies analysis.
At last! A challenge I can get my teeth into!
Lion-O left the cat's lair in pursuit of Safari Joe, but only a short distance from the lair he fell into a disguised pit trap set by the hunter. Lion-O was disgusted with himself for falling for such a simple trick, but it would be easy for him to leap out. He was about to do so when he realized that perhaps that was just what Safari Joe was waiting for him to do. Using the Eye of Thundera, Lion-O observed the lie of the land and saw the hunter with his rifle at the ready, waiting for him to make a move. Deliberately, he put the claw shield over the edge of the pit and fired the climbing spike into a tree. Safari Joe kept his rifle trained on the claw shield, waiting for Lion-O to come up with it. But Lion-O was no longer wearing the device. He leapt out of the pit in another direction, leaving the hunter firing uselessly at the empty claw shield. Lion-O extended his sword at arm's length and called aloud,
Thunder! 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 Thundercats! Ho!
The beams sped out from the sword and projected the signal against the moonlit sky. Safari Joe was not impressed.
If you're calling your friends, forget it. They're as weak as kittens, and one word from me will destroy them, and you'd be nothing without that sword. Release my friends, and I'll fight you without it.
The hunter agreed, and Lion-O put aside the Sword of Omens. But Safari Joe did not keep his side of the bargain, and the Thundercats remained imprisoned in their cages. Without the sword, the fight was long and hard, and carried on right into the cat's lair. At last, Safari Joe had Lion-O cornered at point-blank range. He raised his rifle and began to crow his success.
Ha! Safari Joe does it!
But he reckoned without Snarf, who charged from out of nowhere and kicked a bucket hard at the boasting hunter. The rifle fell from his hand, and the tables were completely turned. Safari Joe collapsed in a heap.
Please, no, don't hurt me!
Lion-O lifted him up by the scruff of the neck with one hand. Snarf looked on and smiled.
Safari Joe turned out to be a big coward, didn't he, Lion-O?
The Lord of the Thundercats looked at the whimpering hunter.
Most bullies are, Snarf. Come, help me free the others. We'll release the mighty hunter when he promises never to hunt again.